You're listening to the Pilot Podcast Season 3, Complex Questions. The Pilot Podcast is brought to you by Kaospilot, an international school for creative leadership and meaningful entrepreneurship based in Aarhus, Denmark. My name is Helga Bryndís Einarsdóttir, and I am a recent graduate from Kaospilot and the host of this podcast. The challenges we face in the 21st century are highly complex and globally entangled. With the rise of globalization, the ongoing expansion of information technology, and an unfolding environmental crisis, the world has changed in quite radical ways in the past decades alone. At Kaospilot, working with complexity is part of how we learn, design, and lead. Across the 3-year program, students explore not just how to navigate complexity, but how to engage with it, to create new ways of organizing, collaborating, and responding in ways that do not close the question, but expand our capacity to stay with it and to participate in systems transformation as it unfolds. Through complex questions, we'll step into the uncertainties of these challenges, ask not how to solve them, but how different people are living, wrestling, and experimenting with them today. Our guest for this episode is Rob Hopkins. Rob is an English environmental activist and writer. He is the co-founder of the Global Transition Towns movement and the author of 2 books, From What Is to What If, and How to Fall in Love with the Future, exploring how communities can envision and create regenerative and hopeful futures. He is joined here with us today to explore the question, how can we imagine a thriving future on a planet undergoing rapid ecological collapse? Without further ado, let's dive into it. Welcome, Rob. How are you today?
Hi, lovely to see you. Thank you so much for having me on.
Yes, thank you for coming.
My pleasure.
I'm honored. How has your travel to Copenhagen been?
Very smooth, very easy, and the sun is shining. Copenhagen is like beautiful early autumn sunny day. Yeah, couldn't have gone better.
It's a very pretty day. So I was wondering, how do you introduce yourself? Now you've also been a podcast host yourself. So who is Rob Hopkins?
How do I introduce myself? That's always a very difficult question at a party when someone says, what do you do? It's like, how long have you got? So I would say I'm an author and an activist and a public speaker and an artist and a father. That'll probably do, I guess.
Sounds like a good bunch.
Keeps me busy enough anyway.
Yeah. Okay, so I think I wrote this as well in the email I sent to you when I asked if you would want to join us in the podcast. But a couple of years ago, I was reading a book called Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer.
Yeah.
A great book for if somebody's interested in relationships to nature, reciprocity. But in the opening of the book, she talks about, or she asks this question, like, how can we begin to move towards a ecological and culturally sustainable world or future when we cannot even imagine it?
Yeah.
And I think she asks this after she has posed a little survey to her. She is teaching a class on not conservatism, on how to conserve nature.
I'd be very disappointed if she was teaching a course on conservatism.
Yeah, I don't think that's her subject.
Conservation, maybe.
Conservation, thank you. Need to get my brain into English. But yeah, she was teaching a class at the uni, and she asks the students how, if they can think of any positive relationships between humans and nature, like how we can positively affect the planet and our ecological surroundings. And the average answer was none. There are no positive relations we can have with our nature. And I think this was what prompted her to ask this question.
Yeah.
And I think this also connects to what I've heard thrown around a lot, at least in the climate activism environment, is that statement that we are in an imagination crisis.
Yeah.
And I guess that's what you are also working with.
Yeah.
So what's your perspective on the imagination crisis we are in today?
Yeah. I mean, Bell Hooks also once said something like, what we cannot imagine cannot come into being. It's a fundamental thing that that we need to be able to imagine something before we can go on and create it. Everything we are surrounded by exists only because it was imagined by somebody once, who then went on to actually create it. And when I started one of the things that prompted the research that I did for From What Is to What If, the first book about imagination, was I kept reading people who I really respect, like Bill McKibben, Naomi Klein, Amitav Ghosh, George Monbiot. They were publishing articles around the same time where there was this line would appear that said, climate change is a failure of the imagination. And then they would carry on and start talking about something else. I was sort of left there going,
okay.
What do you mean?
Statement?
What do you mean? What does that mean? And then around that same time, I read this piece of research done by a researcher in America called Kyung-hee Kim, where she took together all of this research from something called the Torrance test for creative thinking, which is kind of like research-wise, the closest thing we have to a kind of imagination test, sort of for measuring the state of health of an imagination,
Okay.
And they've done this with like large data sets in America going back to the late 1950s. And she looked at all of this data, and her conclusion was that imagination and IQ rose together till the mid-1990s, at which point IQ kept rising and imagination started to fall. And when she published this paper called The Creativity Crisis, it made the front page of Newsweek magazine, and people were saying, what does this mean for economic growth? And what does this mean for Disney? Neither of which I really care about very much at all. But it left me really thinking, shit, what does this mean for the climate movement? Because actually, fundamentally at the heart of climate politics is not even just an invitation, but like the necessity of reimagining everything. We have to reimagine our food system, our transport system, our energy system, everything. And at the moment when we're seeing the rise of this kind of politics that's just like, no, we can't reimagine everything because we like it how it used to be and we want to go back. And it's too difficult and we don't understand it and we just can't go there. It makes it so important, I think. I read an article recently by a guy called, I can't remember his name anyway. He wrote this article where he talked about the Trump disimagination machine.
Okay.
I think we're living in this really dangerous time where the imagination is being colonized. No, sorry, the future is being colonized and the future is being cancelled. And when I do work now, working with young people find it incredibly difficult to imagine the future. The future is sort of disappearing. If you look back to the late 1960s, you had very much, you had politicians like Bobby Kennedy, Martin Luther King, who talked about the future and filled it with dreams and stories and things to run towards. If Martin Luther King had done his speech and said, I have a nightmare, there's a very different quality to that than saying I have a dream. So for me, what I'm trying to do is to say, when I was writing that book, it felt like somewhere just out of our field of vision, something really, really important, the human imagination, which we have created this sort of perfect conditions for our collective imagination to shrink and dwindle and desiccate. There's very little space for imagination in schools now. There's very little space for imagination in people's work lives. We all carry these highly addictive devices around in our pockets that devour the time when 20 years ago you might have sat and read a book or written a poem or done some drawing. Now we're just like, I must just check my Instagram or whatever it is. And all of that potential creativity is lost. We know that the more unequal societies become, the more you create the conditions in which it's harder and harder for people to be imaginative. All of these things that are coming together. And what I wanted to do was to say, that's really important, and to put the imagination back on the table and say, look, if we don't value this and treasure this as a population, if we lose our ability to see things as if they could be otherwise, which is my favorite definition of what imagination is, if we lose that, we're really, really in trouble. So that's why I've made this such a kind of focus of my work really over the last 6 years.
So why do you think that so few people can imagine a vibrant and sustainable future? Like, why is it so hard for us?
So the neuroscience of it is really interesting. I'm not a neuroscientist, but when I was researching that book, I read lots of papers and I interviewed a whole bunch of different neuroscientists. That when you are trying to imagine the future, what's happening in your brain, if you're trying to imagine the future or remember the past, it's exactly the same neural pathways that kick in. Exactly the same process happens. Because if you're trying to imagine the future, then what's happening is that your brain is going to the cupboards of Helga's memory and looking through those cupboards. If I said, Helga, I'm going to take you to Italy on a holiday next month, and you've never been there before, then your brain goes, send up the file with Italy written on the front. And you get given this file of everything you've ever heard or read about Italy. And then your imagination uses that as the building blocks to assemble the picture of what you imagine it's going to be like when we go to Italy, right? So if all you ever do is read like right-wing, if you just watch Fox News all day, for example, it's really hard to imagine a low-carbon future. Because you go to those cupboards and there's nothing in those cupboards at all.
But even in like even if we go to what you would then try to call like more leftist media, it's still hard to see examples of
exactly
what is
and we hear, but what I try to do in the new book is to pull all this stuff together and say all the things that we need to do to create the world that we know that we have to create right now, and we have to create it incredibly fast, because if we had started this 20 years ago, we could have done it quite gradually. It would have been really easy. Now we just have to jump in with both feet, because that's the time window that we have left to do this stuff. All of the stuff that we need to do already exists somewhere. You know, we're talking about cities that have the cycling infrastructure of Rotterdam, the super blocks of Barcelona, the reimagining of the food system that you see in Liège, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Everything that we need to know already exists. And we live in this society, this economy, which is fixated on innovation and all. We don't really need, my argument is we don't need to be investing billions and billions of euros into innovation, because we already know all the things we need to do. Where we need to be investing is in how do we get populations to long for this stuff? Like how do we make this the North Star for people? You know, it's like, for me, that word longing is so fundamental to all of this. You know, the story that I always use to illustrate it is the moon, right? In 1865, Jules Verne wrote this book, From the Earth to the Moon. He pulled together all the best science he could find at the time about how you might actually get human beings to go to the moon. And then he wrote a thrilling, exciting story about how that happened, some of which 100 years later turned out to be incredibly accurate to what actually happened. Some of it not quite so much. But what that book did was it was a hugely popular book that then inspired engineers and scientists to start thinking, yeah, how would we do that actually? But it also inspired this whole genre of storytelling and popular science and magazines about how will we play football on the moon? What will it be like to go to a hotel on the moon? What will we eat on the moon? And you had like the first feature film made in 1902, Georges Méliès, A Trip to the Moon. You had Mickey Mouse went to the moon. Popeye went to the moon. Tintin went to the moon. You had jazz dances about walking on the moon. You had a whole genre in the 1950s of dreadful films where all male crews of astronauts go to the moon. There were 10 of these films, go to the moon to find it populated entirely by women who haven't seen men for a long time. These very weird films. And then it meant that actually then in 1969, when Neil Armstrong did go to the moon, Hergé, who made the Tintin cartoons, did this picture of Neil Armstrong stepping out onto the moon to be greeted by Captain Haddock and Tintin and all of those characters with a sign saying, "Welcome to the moon, Mr. Armstrong." Because by the time we did it, we had been there already thousands and thousands of times in stories and songs. And those went first, and they created the longing that then made it inevitable. With the climate emergency, with the nature emergency, with all the different things we see happening in the world, we don't have 100 years to think about this, but I feel like that same principle still applies. We have to become so much better at cultivating longing. If we just talk about collapse and extinction and imagine that's going to mobilize and motivate people, we know it doesn't. We are spectacularly losing at the moment the push to stop climate collapse. Yeah. And we know that narrative, that idea that we just have to give people enough information and show them enough terrifying videos and they'll all get really engaged, it doesn't work. And what I'm arguing is actually what we need to instead is to build build movements that are about longing. And the recognition that comes with that is we can't do that without artists and musicians and playwrights and street artists and all those people in our culture who are brilliant at cultivating longing. Climate activists are rubbish at cultivating longing.
Yeah, what's
it's
that
not what
about?
we do.
Why is it like that?
Well, climate scientists aren't trained in the cultivation of longing. They're scientists, right? They're there to present evidence. They're a bit like English people on holiday, where when people don't understand something, they just say it again louder and hope that people will understand it. That doesn't really work. Climate activists, it's often this, completely understandable, and I do it myself, but it's this thing of feeling such urgency and desperation that there's this kind of, why can't you see this? And this sort of confrontational, and we need all forms of activism. I'm not saying we need to not, we need those amazing people who put themselves in the way of things. We need the people who get into politics. The way I like to think of it is it's like the civil rights movement in the 1960s. You had someone like Malcolm X, who was seen as the sort of radical extreme end, who then made Martin Luther King seem like the more politically acceptable thing. But actually, when people, and you hear people talk about that quite a lot, but what is often left out of that is, well, you also had the Black Panthers who were setting up amazing social programs and free school meals and doing all that very practical community stuff. But you also had Sun Ra and Parliament Funkadelic and Black utopian writers and what we now call Afrofuturism, this whole incredibly vibrant artistic thing that was about sort of a very different way of giving people access into Black politics and Black ideas and ideas about Black liberation. And I feel like it's the same now. Of course, we need Just Stop Oil, Extinction Rebellion, we need all of that. Of course, we need like the climate majority stuff, the more sort of acceptable face of climate activism. But I think we also need something which is a kind of positive futurism movement, which is very playful, fun, kind of a bit ridiculous, but that is able to help people take away some of the fear and the stigma around this and make it feel like a really cool, exciting, adventurous thing to be part of.
Yeah. And it's also a bit terrifying when I hear that, I've heard this on the media and I heard this at a course the other day, that the climate change, environmental challenges, sustainability, like all of these topics, that the public is getting like more and more tired of hearing about it. Like they don't want to, they get like kind of fed up with it. I guess maybe because it is the same narratives of urgency and emergency narratives. Yeah. But I just think that's a bit scary and like puts emphasis on that we really need to be communicating in more engaging ways and where people actually want to be a part of it.
I do think it's really important that we don't lose sight of the fact that the last 20, 30, 40 years, we have seen the most enormous, well-funded pushback by oil and gas, plastic industry, meat industry. The fact that we can read something in the media that says, people are so tired of hearing about climate change. It's like, often it's taken a lot of money from oil and gas companies to get those narratives out into the public. Because actually, what's very interesting, there was a massive survey about 4 months ago, the biggest, I think, global survey of opinions towards climate change, showed that 89% of people were really concerned about climate change as an issue. But the most important bit was that then when they were asked, what percentage of the population do you think also share your concern? They all said, probably about 40%.
Yes, I've heard about this.
Yeah, so it's like there is a huge sort of disinformation, very, very well-funded machine at work to try and make us think that we're a minority, try and make us feel like we're some sort of weird fringe kind of thing. Actually, the majority of people, the large majority of people, can see what's happening and are really concerned about it, but they can't see a way through. And partly, I think, when Extinction Rebellion, who I have huge admiration for, and I know many, many people have been involved with it in different ways myself, was that when there was the big rebellion, the big first one in April 2019, they took a position to say, well, when people would say, yeah, well, all right, Extinction Rebellion, you've ground London to a standstill for 8 days. What do you want? Like, what would the world look like if we actually listened to Extinction Rebellion?
Okay.
And their response was, well, that's not for us to say. That should come out of citizens' assemblies, because they were trying to promote the idea that actually that we need to reimagine politics. It's about changing the system, not just talking about, well, we need to have a different kind of solar panels or whatever. But I felt like with that, they missed out on a really amazing storytelling opportunity. That was the moment to bring in the storytellers to be saying, well, do you imagine what London could be like? Actually, what London could be like if it was halfway there. What would the air smell like? What would we eat? How would it sound different when you walk down the street? That's the bit that really kind of excites me. Yeah. There's an activist, a woman in Berlin called Wasima Labic, who does this work she calls Muslim futures, working with the Muslim community in Berlin, looking at futures. And she coined this term sensual futuring, which I just love. Sensual futuring. Okay. So it's not just about close your eyes and imagine the future. It's like, what does it smell like? What does it taste like? What does it feel like on your skin? And that's sort of a lot of the stuff that I do is really around that. Like, how do you help people to kind of step out of the present, step into that future in a way that it kind of gets into their bones. Yeah. Rilke, he once said something like, the future must enter into you a long time before it happens. How do we do that? And I feel like a lot of the tools that we often have in our toolbox as activists just don't do that. It doesn't help the future to enter into people. It makes people fearful about the future. It makes them kind of retreat a little bit, makes them maybe feel a little bit judged, rather than someone kind of putting their arm around you and saying, come on, I'll show you the way. You're going to love it. Come on. In the new book, I interview Peter Kalmus, who's an amazing climate scientist in America, one of the ones who has recognized that it's not enough anymore just to publish papers. Okay. And so he's very much like an activist climate scientist. He's been arrested twice, and he's really amazing. And I said to him, okay, as a climate scientist, you often have to present like all the worst case scenarios. You do all the graphs that do that and the graphs that do that. What's the best case scenario? Like, what would it, like if we did absolutely everything now, right? Starting now, we threw everything we possibly could at this. What would that look like? He said, I call that emergency mode. The world goes into emergency mode. It means we phase out fossil fuels and industrial meat production very, very quickly. And then there's a chance we can stay below 2 degrees. And then we can use all the things we know, the natural ways of drawing CO2 back down again. And I was like, that's brilliant. But emergency mode is a terrible name for it.
Right.
No one's going to go, hey, let's do emergency mode. Woo-hoo. If it was called like delicious adventure mode or thrilling possibilities mode, that's the bit we have to storytell much, much better about what that journey would look like.
Yeah. That's a really good perspective.
Thank you.
Okay, so going a bit to your background.
Yeah.
I was curious to hear about the transition towns movement, because that is at least what your work was focused on before you started writing books. Am I right?
I wrote a few books about transition. So before that,
okay.
yeah. So there was like 3 or 4 books
in the research
about that. Yeah.
Okay, but could you tell us about the transition towns movement and where it sprouted from?
Sure. It started. Well, I lived in Ireland for 10 years in Southwest Ireland, and I was a permaculture teacher in a college in a town called Kinsale, and we created the first 2-year full-time permaculture course in the world in that college there. And the last year that I was there was the first time we had a second year. And I set them a project where I said, okay, imagine I'd been reading lots of books about climate and oil depletion and these things.
And when was this?
This was 2004.
Wow, that's early.
Yeah. 2004. And so I set them a project where over the year, we went off to visit loads of different projects, and I came in and told them about loads of things I was reading about. And the idea was I put them into different groups and I gave them a subject. So, right, you are the energy people, you are the education people, you are the food people. And over the year, what they had to do was to design a pathway by which, after 20 years, Kinsale could reach a point where it was no longer dependent on oil and gas, but was in a better place than where it had started from. And so we would then go and visit all these different things so they could say, oh yeah, like that. And then when at the end of the year, so April 2005, when they handed in their coursework and I saw all these things together, I thought, this is amazing. Really, really interesting. And no one's really done this before. And so I put them all together. I used my last bit of budget, my teacher's budget, to create a little book that had a little bit of introduction at the beginning and then went through all these different subjects. And we called it the Kinsale Energy Descent Action Plan.
Okay.
And then when I left and I moved back to the UK and I brought this thing with me. And when I moved to the town where I now live, which is Totnes, which is where the transition movement then kind of really started moving.
Okay.
The idea was, because then we put that online like as a free PDF for people to download, and it got downloaded like tens of thousands of times. And people were saying, this is the thing that's been missing. Like everyone's been, there's a problem, whatever, but no one had said, well, actually, maybe we could design a way through this. We can bring that sort of permaculture design thinking to designing how we might find a way through this, And then so transition started with a group of people who started to meet with each other in Totnes, each of whom brought different pieces of the puzzle. There were some amazing women who brought more the kind of inner aspect of it. Like, okay, if we're going to be trying to work with this community to make it more resilient, to put in place the things we're going to need for this journey, we need to make sure that this group is going to be able to last. Like, how do we make sure we all just don't get burnt out after 6 months? How do we make sure we have meetings people enjoy coming to? How do we have good processes to manage conflict and make good decisions? There were lots of different groups then came together and projects started to emerge. We have a community energy company with lots of local food projects, community becoming its own housing developer. We have a project underway now where they're starting to build 35, I think, affordable homes for local people, built ecologically. It's like, it's very much, there's all those things we know we need to do as individuals. We need to stop flying if we can. We need to eat much less meat, all those things. We know all the things that the governments need to do. Yeah. But there's that bit in the middle, which is, but what can we do in our street, in our town, in our neighborhoods?
Like locally.
Yeah, with the people around us. There's huge untapped potential. So it started in Totnes, and then already within 2 or 3 months, we had people all over the world getting in touch and saying, what are you doing? How do you do that? How can we do that too?
How did they find you?
That's a very good question. It was kind of in the early, I had a blog that I did.
Early internet.
Yeah, early internet. And so I had a blog that I posted things on and was kind of keeping people up to date with how that journey was going. We had like a wiki page where we were putting up and inviting people to shape what it was. YouTube was kind of a new thing then, if that probably feels unimaginable to people, that there was a time when YouTube was kind of a new thing.
Indeed.
And, but then there were people, I remember there was a moment after about 6 months of doing it where someone said, look at this. And there was a video on YouTube of a woman in New Zealand in a church hall. We'd never met her, never spoke to her. There were no books published at that point. And she was giving a talk to her community in New Zealand about why they should become a transition town. It's like, this is really, really interesting. Wow. So now if you look around the world, there's transition groups in 50 countries, I think thousands of groups, very much a self-organizing kind of a thing. Someone once called the transition movement hope with its sleeves rolled up, which I really, really liked.
That's like, very good.
It has that sort of let's just get on with it kind of spirit from permaculture.
So it's action-oriented in some ways.
Yeah.
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 Maybe not only, but...
I guess it's like, sort of in the work that I do now, it's like there's the action-oriented side of transition, and then there's the imagination side of it. There's a woman who I love called Mariam Kaba in America, who's a prison abolition campaigner in America. And she says we must imagine while we build, always both. If we just sit around and imagine all the time, that's not really much use to anybody.
Yeah.
But also if we just run around doing things and we're not taking the time to really
think about
the world we're trying to build with that stuff, then it's all a bit pointless. So we must imagine while we build, always both. So really for about 15 years, my role in the transition movement was kind of collecting the stories of that movement. Like we always said to people, you don't have to pay an annual membership fee to be a transition group. You don't have to, there's no commitment other than that you share your stories back into that movement. So it's like a movement of stories. And for many years, my role was just to scan that movement for interesting stories and then amplify them through films or videos or books or whatever.
That's beautiful as well.
But it's still running in lots of places, and you can find all the tools online very easily.
I actually looked at the map this morning, as you can see like all the transition towns movements in the world, like an interactive map where you can find them.
Yeah.
And then I found some here locally in Copenhagen and like everywhere. It was really cool to look at.
Yeah.
But now you are working a lot with imagination, but you have also been time traveling. And I love that. I love that part of the story. But could you also tell us how you got into time traveling and where that started from?
So in about 2021, I saw a T-shirt. I saw a photograph of a Black Lives Matter protest in Washington, and there was a young woman in the picture, and she had a T-shirt, and it said, "I've been to the future. We won." And it gave me huge goosebumps. Like it was a real whew. And at that time I was reading quite a lot of Afrofuturist stuff, listening to a lot of Sun Ra records. And it struck me as such a different way of thinking about this from the climate movement that I had come through, I've been to the future. We won. It was like, I was like, it really was, it kind of really touched me. And it was about 3 weeks before there was Extinction Rebellion were organising a thing in London called The Big One.
Okay,
where they wanted to get 100,000 people to surround Parliament to keep the government's attention on climate change. And they asked me to go up and speak.
Okay.
And I thought, okay, I often work with this idea that the things that I feel kind of uncomfortable about, or really, do I want to do this? Is this kind of career suicide? Are often the most interesting things. The most interesting things lie on the other side of those moments where you're like, really?
What's a little scary or a little
scary? Am I really going to do that?
Yeah.
And so I went to my local hardware shop and I bought like a white sort of hazmat suit, and I ordered a sort of pretend space helmet online. And then I went up to this thing in London, and it was just like in the street on a little box.
Yeah.
And they gave me a microphone and said, "Off you go." And so I gave this talk for about 10 minutes as if I had just parked my time machine around the corner, and I had just come back from 2030, and I was so excited about what I had seen there that I just had rushed round to say, "Oh my God, it's amazing. You're going to love it so much. Oh, there was this and there was that, and the bicycle rush hours and the food growing everywhere. It was just amazing." And I did this sort of 10-minute kind of, and there was this and there was that, and people told me about the hangovers they still had from the parties that celebrated when BP and Shell went out of business in 2028. And there was this and there was that. And then after about 7 minutes or something, there was this moment when I said, and when the fact that I've been there and now I can stand here in front of you and tell you all about it, it makes me feel really emotional just being able to tell you about what's just around the corner. And then I looked at all the people who were kind of closest to me, and there were tears on people's faces.
Wow.
I was like, this is really interesting. Like, what's happening here? There's a sort of something like I'd never touched people in that way before when I did my normal talks.
Yeah, it brings another type of feeling as well. Yeah, it feels different.
It feels different, exactly. And so this book that I've just published called How to Fall in Love with the Future was then very much an exploration of that. Like, what happens when we do that? Like, why does that work? And I think it's partly because we are storytelling creatures.
Yeah.
And, I mentioned Sun Ra before, who was this amazing jazz musician and artist in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, who told this amazing story about himself, that he wasn't actually a human being at all. He was actually an angel from Saturn.
Oh.
And that with his band, they traveled through space, and all of his music was about space.
Okay.
And all of his band wore these fabulous costumes, but like all the time. I read a review of them that said that they looked like a nativity play where everyone had decided to come as the three kings. It's quite a nice mental picture of them. And they all lived in a house together, and they used to just practice this extraordinary music all the time. And he used space travel as a very different way of talking about black liberation than people like the Black Panthers were at the time. It was like, well, if we can't be who we want to be here, in space we could be anything.
Yeah.
On different planets, we could be anything. What could we be on different planets? And I read this, and I read this article that talked about Sun Ra and his band as being everyday utopians. Like, they didn't wear these costumes just when they went on stage.
So they practiced it.
It was who they were.
Yeah.
And I met people who knew Sun Ra, and I said, "Do you think he really believed he was from Saturn?" And he said, "Oh yeah." And everybody in his band did too. That was like,
wow.
And they said that Sun Ra did. In this article, it said Sun Ra did everything he did with an unshakable certainty and deadpan humor. It's like, and so as I was starting to do this work, which is kind of inventing this sort of alter ego, that in my town we've built a time machine.
Yeah.
And when I do my talks, it's not like. It's like unshakable certainty, deadpan humor. I've built a time machine in Totnes, and I've actually bought it here. I've got it with me here. And we're going to use it, and I'm going to turn this room into a time machine, and I'm going to take you to that 2030.
Because also, if you want to use it and you want to really get it to work, you cannot doubt it yourself for a second.
No, not at all. So there's and then it's like, I think there might be some of you who still don't believe that we've got a time machine. And then I show them pictures of the laboratory that we built the time machine in. I show them videos of us going off time traveling. I show them, okay, all right, we all agreed. Okay, of course it's happening. All right, let's go. And it's the beautiful thing about time travel is that before H.G. Wells wrote the book The Time Machine, the idea that you might intentionally go backwards and forwards in time to a place you want to visit never occurred to anybody, ever at all.
Okay.
And then H.G. Wells wrote The Time Machine.
When was that?
We're all like that was 1895.
Okay.
And then when he wrote that book, everyone was like, oh, cool. So if I stand up in front of a room full of people and I say, this glass is actually a time machine, nobody says, now Rob, come on, explain to me the quantum mechanics of exactly how that comes. People go, oh, cool, where are we going?
Oh.
And then we go. And so there's something for me that is just like, I take people there, I get them to close their eyes, I get them to imagine what that world is like. I get them to explore it with all their senses. Like, what does it smell like? What are you smelling as you're walking about? And then when I bring them back again, then we capture that in different ways. So sometimes I get them to draw it. Sometimes I get them to collect to write stories about it. Sometimes I give them a cup. If we're somewhere where there's a garden or a forest, I say, here's a cup. You've got 15 minutes. Go outside and make in that cup a cocktail of smells of what that world smelt like.
Wow.
And then come back and we'll have a cocktail party where you'll go around and you're going to smell like 40 different smells of the future. Then, to go back to Rilke, the future starts to enter into you. When you start to bring in smell and taste and music. There's a project I've been working on as well for the last couple of years, which is called Field Recordings from the Future, which is where I go to visit places across Europe that already sound like that future. Like, if you want to imagine what would it sound like to live in a city with no cars and with just bicycles and trams, you go to Utrecht at 8 o'clock in the morning, you sit in the centre of Utrecht and 40,000 bicycles cycle past you. It's insane.
That just sounds insane.
It's insane. You want to imagine what it would be like to live in a neighbourhood without any cars? You go to the Vauban in Freiburg, 3,000 people live in a neighbourhood with no cars.
Wow.
And it sounds so different from the world that most of us are used to. I realized when I was there making field recordings that you can hear people having piano lessons in their houses. I don't remember. It was the first time I remember in my life ever being able to hear a piano lesson inside someone's house. Because normally it's just at the level that's drowned out by the background noise of traffic, right? In the Vauban, you can hear it. So we go to visit regenerative farms, underground mushroom farms, landscapes being rewilded by beavers, make field recordings. And then I'm working with this amazing young ambient electronic music artist called Mr. Kit. And we've made an album called Field Recordings from the Future, which came out a couple of months ago. And then we've been developing this beautiful live show where we build this structure lined with fabric, where you project from 4 different angles. And it's like you're just surrounded by beavers and bicycles and mushroom farms. And it's just the most amazing
whole
thing.
Soundscape.
It's a whole soundscape. It's really kind of immersive. It's like we pick you up in 2025 and we take you to 2035 and we leave you there. And it's beautiful. And that we're going to be doing a big tour of that next year. So it's like those are the things that I'm always looking for. How do we make this as multisensory and delicious as possible?
Okay. I've also noticed that you've often talked about like traveling to 2030 or now 2035, somewhere in that. Is that, why to like these years and why not further? Is there a thought behind that?
Yes, there's very much a reason for that. You know, okay. I think the thing is always, you know, we are surrounded by dystopian stories.
Yes.
You go onto Netflix. Are we wiped out by zombies, gremlins, aliens, viruses, whatever? I mean, enough with the dystopian stories, really. They really don't help at all. And utopian stories are really not that helpful either because they're usually so far away, they're not that helpful. The only thing that we have in the world as a possible route map for how the world can avoid climate collapse is the Paris Agreement. And yes, there are some countries at the moment in the world who are moving away from the Paris Agreement, which makes it all the more important for the other countries to double down on the Paris Agreement. But that's what we have, right? And if we give up on that, then we give up on any kind of a route map, really. Even though the Paris Agreement itself really isn't quite ambitious enough. The Paris Agreement says that by 2030, we need to have cut our emissions by 48%. That's 5 years away, right? So for me, that's so much more interesting than what some perfect world in 2200 where we all live off algae might look like. You know, I want to know what's that right 2030 like?
Yeah,
where we're halfway down the other side of the emissions mountain, and we can see the world around us improving. We can see the biodiversity coming back. We can see our young children's mental health improving. We can see all the benefits, and we're only halfway there, and we're building the momentum to get the rest of the way. To help people imagine that feels so much more useful than imagining some algae world. It's like, actually, I want to know because the other thing is often when we think, okay, we're trying to imagine the future. Okay, I'm in Copenhagen. So Copenhagen will all have been knocked down and replaced and look like Star Trek, and we'll all be flying around on hoverboards. It's like, no.
It's hard to relate to.
It's going to look like Copenhagen, but with key differences. And that underneath, you know, what I always say to people, actually, the most important thing in that 2030 is the look in people's eyes, because there's a very different look in people's eyes, which is a look of, I think we might just do this. This is really exciting. It's why, like, if you see the pictures of us when we do our time travel suits, these sort of white suits, we always say they have a very important, we wear those not to protect us, to protect the people in the future when we arrive there, because the suits have a very strong anti-cynicism coating. So it means that when we arrive there in the future, where people are kind of on this mission and they can see this is going in the right direction, we're going to do this. If we arrive with our 2025 cynicism and start saying, oh yeah, right, like that's going to work,
we're going to contaminate them.
We're going to contaminate it. We can't arrive there and do past splaining. That's not allowed. So,
yeah. But this actually flows perfectly into my next wondering. Although we are running out of time. Time flies.
Yes, it does.
When you're having conversations. But that is this thing that I've heard you talk about in other interviews as well. Like, you have rejected cynicism. That is a statement you have made. Like, and the future you travel to is post-cynicism. And I think that's super both like, I would love to live in that world. I think it sounds very exciting, but it also makes me wonder, because on a personal level, even though I'm very hopeful and optimistic in many ways, it's hard not to be cynical at many other points as well. It's hard to completely get rid of. So I think I have like two questions, and the first one is like, how do you maintain the hope, or like, do you ever feel the cynicism? Does it ever drag you down? And then maybe the other question. We can start with that, but maybe try to keep your answers short.
Okay. Yes, I think, of course, if you are just optimistic all the time, then you're really not paying attention. But at the same time, if you're pessimistic all the time, I think we kind of get paralyzed with that. It's not really very useful. I feel like my resignation, my pessimism is a gift that I refuse to give to the people who are so adamant on destroying everything. They spend a lot of money to buy people's despondency and cynicism, and they're not having mine. And so I feel like there's a difference. Like I feel like the optimism that I have is not. If you just purely look at the data and the science, it's quite hard to muster a sense of optimism.
Yes, it's very hard.
It's very hard. But at the same time, there have been many, many, many examples through human history of human beings doing extraordinary things in short periods of time, over 5-10 year periods. And we saw during COVID how phenomenally quickly things could change when governments listen to science and act based on that science. So that's kind of what gives me. But I think the thing with cynicism is a kind of a different, like, cynicism is just like walking around with your shoelaces untied. It's like you just keep tripping yourself up all the time. You create obstacles to your finding. It's like, well, that's never going to work. Well, maybe it might do. It's like I try and replace that with I'm always curious, like curiosity and seeking out stories of what's possible, because everything we need to know already exists. It's just we hardly ever hear those stories, but they're out there.
Yeah, that's the thing.
So I'm always looking for those stories, so that when someone says, "Oh, you can't do that," it's like, actually, do you know what? In Germany, they've just done this, and here they've done this. Yeah,
that's very beautiful. So what I hear you say is that you also are human, and you also get dragged down and feel less hopeful maybe some days, but you never give in to the cynicism of try to keep being curious. And I think my activism is driven by a mixture of belief in fundamental human goodness, a curiosity and a love of possibility, and a deep rage. That's a beautiful combination.
Yeah.
Also powerful and scary if used right.
Yeah. Hopefully it's a volatile mix, but I think I balance it quite well.
I think to end it off, then I'd like to ask you, maybe how can ordinary people start to expand?
People.
Yeah, I mean, like people who are not time travelers, perhaps.
People who aren't time travelers. Okay.
Yeah, like that. How can they start expanding their imagination or maybe do time traveling exercises? I don't know if that's something you recommend, but how can we cultivate it in our daily lives? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I think the thing that I always say to people when I do the time travel activity that I do with people is after I've brought them back again, as I say, it's really important that we do this really regularly. Almost like in the same way that we might have a daily practice of yoga or running or meditation or whatever. Making a bit of space for time traveling is really important too, because the more that you do it, the more that future comes into focus. Well, at the beginning, it's quite grainy and you can't really see, and maybe it's a bit greener, or maybe there's more bikes or something. The more you do it, the more it comes into focus.
Okay.
Because the reality is that doing the opposite of that practice is a daily practice.
that we're already doing.
We wake up, we don't think about it. We wake up every morning, we open our phones say, oh God, look what's happening now. Oh God, everyone's awful. Oh, what's the point? I don't know, it's all too late. We do that every day. That's a daily practice. We open our laptop, we open our phone, and our belief that the future could be, and then we kind of trip ourselves up because we kind of cancel the future in our own imagination. And that cancelling of the future is so dangerous. We don't even need anybody on the outside going, go on.
Yeah.
It's like, actually, we're very good at doing it ourselves. So for me, we need to recognize that our imagination is really, really precious and really important, and it needs the best conditions. And we know, like Albert Einstein always said, he got his best ideas when he rode his bicycle in the forest. It's like, get out into nature, leave your phone at home, draw, write, read poetry, read novels, do the stuff that we know feeds our imagination, give ourselves times away from those addictive things in our pockets. Imagination also, at its most powerful and important, is something that we do with other people. It's a collective thing. So make those spaces in your organization, in your family, in your street, in your whatever, your community, for people to come together and imagine together. In Bologna, the municipality created something called a civic imagination office. Wow. Such a beautiful concept.
They have that in Bologna.
They have that in Bologna. It's like, we need civic imagination offices everywhere. We need, I'm here in Copenhagen this weekend. We're doing a festival of the future that's happening in City Hall this weekend. One of the things there is, together with Ruth Bentovim, I'm facilitating something called Town Anywhere. Beautiful activity. You bring 200-300 people together to imagine they're traveling into the future, but then you literally build that future with cardboard and string and sticks and sticky tape. You trade in it. You inhabit it. It's like to be with 300 adults lost in a play world that they've imagined is one of the most magical, awesome things I've ever been part of. It's so cool. So for me, it's like make an effort to make it a practice, daily practice. Beautiful. Make it a daily practice and seek the tools and the stories that mean that you can push the sort of... Ruha Benjamin wrote a beautiful book called Imagination and Manifesto. She said, we need to restrain the skeptical grouch that patrols the borders of our imagination. Give them a rest and then see what actually bubbles up. Beautiful. I think that's a great place to end our conversation. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. Delight. I love the English vocabulary. I need to get some more of that. So if any of our listeners want to follow your work or buy your books, where can they find you? They can buy the books wherever they buy the books, apart from Amazon, because we don't like them. I like that. And also I do a newsletter every month, which is called the Time Traveller's Gazette, which if you go to my website, which is robhopkins.net, and at the top there's a box called email newsletter, put your email address in there, and then you'll get it every month. And it's me updating you on things that I've found and things that journeys that I've been on and things I've been reading. And that's the best way to sort of keep up with what I'm doing, I'd say. That sounds like a good recommendation. I'll go and subscribe to the newsletter now. Do. Thank you. Well, thank you for today. My pleasure. Thank you. Thanks for listening to the Pilot Podcast, and stay tuned for further episodes.